Hey guys, welcome back to more HOA stories. What would you do if an HOA president built an illegal Doomsday bunker on your private property without permission? Let's dive right into the story and find out. And the title story was submitted by a viewer via email. He writes, "Hey Ripe, this happened to me a while ago. Please feel free to read this on your channel. I hope your community will find this interesting. Love your videos." So let me provide some context first. You know how they say good fences make good neighbors? Well, let me tell you, no fence in the world could have prepared me for Gladys. Or Gladys, I think I will say Gladys. So my name is Mike, and until about a few years ago, I was living what I thought was the American dream. I got a degree in computer science and I had landed a cushy job at a tech startup and bought my first house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was not much, mind you, a modest 2-bedroom bungalow with a postage stamp of a backyard, but it was mine and I was proud of it. The day I moved in, I was greeted by a parade of neighbors, all smiles and welcome baskets. There was Bob from across the street, a jovial fellow with a beer belly and a penchant for dad jokes. Sarah and her wife Emily lived next door with their 2 adorable kids and a golden retriever named Sunny. And then there was Gladys. Gladys lived in the house behind mine, our backyard separated by a rickety wooden fence that had seen better days. She was in her 60s with steel grey hair always coiffed to perfection and a perpetual scowl that could curdle milk. The day we met, she marched up to me, arms crossed, and declared, "Young man, I hope you understand that this is a respectable neighborhood. We have standards here." I remember blinking in confusion, unsure how to respond. Yes ma'am, I will do my best to uphold those standards," she harumphed, her eyes narrowing as she gave me a once-over. "See that you do, and keep that infernal racket down. Some of us value our peace and quiet." As she turned on her heel and stomped back to her house, I stood there, slack-jawed. I had not even unpacked my stereo yet, let alone made any noise. Welcome to the neighborhood, indeed. Over the next few months, I came to understand that Gladys was not just your run-of-the-mill grumpy neighbor. Oh no, she was a special breed of suburban terror. She was the self-appointed president of our homeowner association, HOA. A position she wielded like a scepter of power over the entire neighborhood. Nothing escaped Gladys' critical eye. My grass was too long, my mailbox was the wrong shade of beige, my Christmas lights were too bright, in July no less. She even had the audacity to complain about the color of my car, insisting that it apparently disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the street. I did not even know streets had aesthetic harmony, but now let's move on to the real meat of the story. I was at my wit's end. I had tried reasoning with Gladys, I tried ignoring her, I'd even tried killing her with kindness, which only made her more suspicious. Just nothing worked. It seemed like I was doomed to spend the rest of my days locked in an endless battle with this neighbor from hell. And then, like a light at the end of the tunnel, an opportunity arose. My company was expanding into the Japanese market and they needed someone to oversee the transition. It was a year-long contract, living and working in Tokyo, the pay was excellent and the experience would be invaluable, and best of all, it meant a whole year away from Gladys. I jumped at the chance. I arranged for my best friend Mark to keep an eye on the house while I was gone. Mark lived a few streets over and had been witness to many of my Gladys-related rants. He promised to mow the lawn, water the roses, and generally make sure the place did not fall apart in my absence. The work in Japan was a dream opportunity, a chance to really immerse myself in a new culture and boost my career. However, what I didn't expect was to return home to a nightmare, courtesy of my crazy neighbor Gladys. You must understand, Gladys always had a knack for stirring up trouble. As mentioned before, she was the epitome of a neighborhood Karen, always complaining about something. Whether it was the color of my flowers or the length of my grass, but this was a whole new level of insane. I pulled up to my house, jet-lagged and exhausted, only to be greeted by a sight that made my jaw drop. There, in the middle of my backyard, was a monstrosity of corrugated steel and concrete, half buried in the ground like some post-apocalyptic tumor. It looked like something straight out of a Mad Max movie, complete with ventilation pipes and a heavy-duty steel door painted yellow with a nuclear warning sign. What in the world? I muttered, stumbling out of my car. I was so shocked I could barely process what I was seeing. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking as I tried to call my best friend Andrew. He lived a few streets over and had promised to keep an eye on the place while I was gone. "Andrew, get over here right now, you won't believe this." He picked up on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Dude, it's like 4 in the morning. "I don't care, get your butt over here, it's an emergency." He grumbled something about needing coffee, but I could hear him scrambling out of bed. True to his word, he showed up 20 minutes later looking as bewildered as I felt. "Holy!" he trailed off, eyes wide as he took in the side of the bunker. "That was not there before, was it?" "No, of course not. I would have told you if I had a secret underground bunker installed." We cautiously approached the structure, the morning dew soaking through our shoes. As we got closer, I noticed a small handwritten sign plastered on the steel door. It read, "Private property, no trespassing," and then in smaller letters underneath, "Gladys and Mr. Whiskers." Mr. Whiskers was Gladys' overweight Persian cat. I swear, the woman treated that cat like royalty. "Mr. Whiskers has his own bunker?" Andrew snorted. "That's just great." Suddenly, the door swung open and there she was, Gladys in all her glory, a scowl etched on her face. She was wearing a pink bathrobe and fuzzy bunny slippers, a stark contrast to the menacing structure behind her. "What are you two doing lurking around my property?" she snapped, her voice dripping with disdain. "Your property?" I sputtered incredulously. "Gladys, this is my backyard." She folded her arms across her chest, her face hardening. "Oh honey, I hate to break it to you, but you seem to have forgotten about our little agreement." "Agreement? What agreement? I've been in Japan for a year, remember?" "The garden, dear," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "We had an agreement. Half of it is mine." I stared at her, completely baffled. "The garden?" "Gladys, we've been over this a million times. You were upset that my rose bushes were casting a shadow on your petunias. We did not make any agreement about you owning half my garden." "Oh, but we did," she insisted, a smug smile spreading across her face. "Don't you remember? We shook on it, and Mr. Whiskers was a witness." I wanted to scream. This woman was delusional. "Gladys, you cannot just build a bunker on someone else's property because you think you own half their garden." "Oh, but I can," she chirped, her smile widening, and I did. "Now, if you'll excuse me, Mr. Whiskers and I have a busy day ahead of us. We are stocking up on supplies for the apocalypse." And with that, she slammed the door shut, leaving me standing there, speechless and fuming. "You've gotta be kidding me," Andrew muttered, shaking his head. "This woman is unbelievable." I knew right then and there that this was not gonna be easy. Gladys was crazy, but she was also stubborn as an ox. I was gonna need a lawyer, and fast. This was literally war. I spent the next few days trying to wrap my head around the situation. I contacted a real estate lawyer, a friend of Andrew's, who seemed both amused and horrified by my story. "Don't worry," he said, chuckling. "We will get that bunker out of your backyard. Gladys might think she's being clever, but she made a huge mistake. We will gather evidence, file a lawsuit, and let the court sort it out." The lawyer, Mr. Thompson, was true to his word. He was efficient, thorough, and clearly relished the prospect of taking down Gladys in court. He had me gather any documentation I had related to my property, including the deed surveys and even old emails with Gladys where she had complained about the rose bushes. "See, this is perfect," Mr. Thompson said, pointing to a line in one of Gladys' emails. "She clearly acknowledges your ownership of the garden here. This will be very helpful in court." Meanwhile, Gladys seemed to be reveling in her newfound notoriety. The local news had gotten wind of the Doomsday bunker dispute, and Gladys was more than happy to give interviews, parading around in her backyard with Mr. Whiskers perched on her shoulder like some kind of furry, judgmental parrot. "It's about being prepared," she declared to a reporter, gesturing dramatically towards the bunker. "The end is nigh and only the prepared will survive. Plus it's half my garden and I can do what I want with it." I was horrified. She was making me out to be the bad guy, the one who was trying to deny her the right to prepare for the apocalypse. So then the lawsuit was filed and the court date was set. I was a nervous wreck. I'd never sued anyone before, and the thought of facing Gladys in court made my stomach churn. The day of the hearing arrived and I sat in the courtroom, my leg bouncing nervously as I waited for the judge to call our case. Gladys, of course, was a vision in purple, her hair sculpted into an elaborate beehive. Mr. Whiskers nestled in a custom-made carrier that looked more expensive than my last car. The hearing itself was a surreal experience. Mr. Thompson presented our case with calm, methodical precision, laying out the evidence that clearly showed Gladys had no legal claim to my property. He brought in a surveyor who testified that the bunker was entirely on my land, not even touching the property line. Gladys, on the other hand, represented herself, and her defense was, well, let's just say, it was entertaining if not entirely coherent. She rambled on about government conspiracies, alien invasions, and the impending zombie apocalypse, all the while clutching Mr. Whiskers so tightly I thought the poor cat might explode. "Your Honor," she declared, her voice trembling with indignation, "this young man is trying to deprive me of my God-given right to prepare for the end of times. He wants us all to perish in the fiery inferno. He is in league with the lizard people, I tell you." The judge, a stern-looking woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, looked like she was trying very hard not to laugh. "Miss Gladys," she said patiently, "while I appreciate your enthusiasm, I'm afraid this court is more concerned with matters of property law than the apocalypse, and the law is quite clear in this case." She went on to deliver her verdict, and it was even better than Mr. Thompson and I had hoped for. Not only did she rule in my favor, ordering Gladys to remove the bunker from my property at her own expense, but she also ordered her to pay for all legal fees and emotional distress. Furthermore, the judge added, her gaze fixed firmly on Gladys, "I'm issuing a restraining order. You are to have no further contact with the plaintiff, either directly or indirectly. That includes but is not limited to phone calls, emails, letters, carrier pigeons, smoke signals, interpretive dance, or any other form of communication. However creative you may be tempted to get." Gladys sputtered in protest, but the judge had spoken. As we left the courtroom, I could hear Gladys yelling about appealing the decision all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary. "Don't worry," Mr. Thompson said, patting me on the shoulder, "she can appeal all she wants. This is an open and shut case. She doesn't have a leg to stand on." He was right, Gladys' appeal was quickly dismissed and she was finally forced to face reality. The bunker was dismantled and removed, leaving my backyard scarred, but thankfully free of Doomsday fortifications. The whole ordeal was exhausting and expensive, but it was also strangely satisfying. Gladys had underestimated me and she had paid the price for it. I learned that sometimes you have to fight fire with fire, even if the fire happens to be a crazy old lady with a doomsday bunker and an overweight cat. And ripe stars, who knows, maybe at some point in the future I might be a crazy old guy leading an HOA with a fast motorcycle and 2 overweight cats. Let's see how it goes in the future. Either way, if you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel because we're getting closer and closer to 130,000 subscribers. Thank you so much. The next one is titled Revenge on House Buyers. I just sold my parents' house. I cleared out everything and gave everything a good clean. It had a professional clean when I put it on the market and nobody was living in it since then. It is 2 days post-closing now and the new owners blew up the realtor's phone with all the garbage left behind, some crackpot rumors, complaints about some things not working, and the dryness of the yard and some other baseless issues. First, the stuff left behind was house stuff, extra wood and extra tile, extra light bulbs. The house has some fancy expensive lights, and there was also the middle section of the dining room table, which stayed. Then of course the custom paint colors for the interior, exterior and trim. Everything was custom when my parents built it, so the paint has the specific codes. The crackpot rumors were that I left garbage outside for 3 days and then drove away saying I don't care. I was back and forth to place a lot, clearing and cleaning. Stuff I couldn't take or sell I put for free on the road, not garbage, and several days before closing I paid my neighbor to remove it with his trailer. I had said to him, I don't care about this stuff, so if nobody takes it, don't worry about it and just take it to the dump and I'll pay for it. When I did my last inspection and cleaning 2 days before closing, nothing was in the driveway, all garbage had been removed. Anything not working had turned up in the home inspection and the buyers were well aware, and now they are trying to bill me. As for the dryness of the yard, we live in an arid semi-desert, there's not much I can do about it. The yard had not changed much between when it was listed and when it closed. The summers are hot here, weather has been in the high 30s Celsius, and there was a fire nearby. Even though I don't live nearby, I live 2 hours away and have 3 kids, I offered to come help clear up some of their complaints. I made sure I took everything not explicitly stated in the contract, so I took all the bulbs, tiles, extra flooring and paint coats. No way in heck are they ever gonna match that properly again. And I also took a very expensive barbecue grill that was hooked up to the natural gas. It's a very nice grill, but my current residence does not have a natural gas hookup, and honestly, I don't have much interest in barbecuing, but I know the new owners remarked on it, so I thought I would be nice and leave it for them. Well, the other thing that is not explicitly stated was a large metal gazebo shading the back patio. It's the perfect size for back there. It was a pain for me to remove, so I thought the new owners would enjoy it, especially since the back patio and enormous back windows face west. In the summer it gets god-awful hot, and without that patio there, they'll be sweating enough to fill a bathtub. Edit, I should clarify, they were pissed when I removed the hardwood tiles, gazebo and barbecue. They did not realize that that is what it was initially. And unless they plan on totally repainting, as opposed to spot touch-ups, they will miss those paint coats. The biggest patio revenge is the barbecue and gazebo, as those were sweet little gifts that I know they wanted. The gazebo especially is the only thing keeping the entire house from being an oven in the summer. The next one is titled Break the Law and Get Destroyed. I used to work as a spare parts estimator for a fairly niche industry. My job was essentially to work out what parts of our main product the customer wanted, find out how much it would cost us to make, add a little markup and send them a quote. My boss was pretty strict on traceability, so everything needed to be recorded, including why a certain markup had been applied to a particular product. Normal value of these quotes is somewhere between £200 and a few $100,000. Very rarely do we get orders for anything more than that, once or twice a decade in my experience, so a request for a quotation landed on my desk when I was working from home during the pandemic, and it was a biggie. Just looking at the list of parts the customer wanted, this was gonna be an absolute killer, over £1 million all by itself. I was told by the sales guy that if this one went well, there was another one to follow of an even bigger size, ultimately looking at 10 million over the next 4 years. So I set to work. Normally I can do 5 or 6 of these quotes in a day, but this one quote took me 6 weeks to put together. I was in constant contact with 20 plus vendors, getting specifications, technical details, prices and lead times for over 400 items. Finally, my masterpiece was complete. Then came the snag. Sales guy then says that because of the country this customer is in, they need to have 4 or more quotes in from different customers in order to get it cleared by their government, some anti-corruption policy that had been instituted. We were the OEM of the product and there's nowhere else on the planet they could get these parts from. So we would have to work through third parties to get it done, and he knew just the guy. In comes a one-man band with a dodgy looking entry at company's house to save the day. Sales guy and him go way back, so he was gonna be the preferential supplier. I was asked to do the normal quote to him and then to bump the prices up by 30% and send it to 3 other companies who had been asking about it, so they would absolutely not get the contract with the end user. I argued the point, saying that the whole purpose of the anti-corruption policy is to prevent situations exactly like this, but I was overruled. The COO of the company now tells me to just do it over a phone call, at which point I request that in writing before I go ahead and do it. Fast forward 2 years and there's still no order been placed. Then I find out through a different sales guy that the one-man band has been put on a blacklist by this country's government over this project, and the other 3 companies have been turned down. And the end user is asking other companies to come in and take our product out and replace it with their own. A huge investigation is called for by senior management. My quote is ripped to pieces and examined in microscopic detail, and the question gets asked, why did you give different prices to these other 3 when you knew it was all to do with anti-corruption? We should fire you. That's millions of pounds of order, you've lost us. Out comes the email from my little black book. On the desk it goes. Everyone suddenly gets very quiet and the COO starts packing his desk in a box the next week. So the moral of the story is, if someone tells you to do something borderline illegal, make sure to get it in writing. Wow, this really went crazy, thank you so much. For those asking about the legality of what I did, because of all of the third parties were outside of the country where the anti-corruption policy was in place, I did not personally break any laws. Whilst the anti-corruption policies are in place for the end user, the worst the government can do is put us on a blacklist, so all of our bids in the future are either refused outright or looked at in far more detail than others might be. I did investigate this at the time, and if there were going to be any implications on me that my company wouldn't have been responsible for, it would have been a flat no. I was acting against the intention of the policy, but not expressly breaking it. Don't do something illegal just because your boss told you to. The issue, as far as the company was concerned, was the lost millions in revenue and the damage to their reputation. The end user is a huge company with contacts and is in a reasonably close-knit industry. People talk. They ultimately wanted a scapegoat to parade in front of the board to explain why the multi-million-pound deal they'd all been talking about for the last 2 years had suddenly vanished. I did also look at OEM angle at the time, but because we are not the only company who makes this type of product, it did not appear to be possible to use this as an exception. The reasoning being that the option existed to replace our system with a competitor's. After posting this, I did a bit of research into the final customer, and their VP of Finance did some fairly well publicized jail time a few years back for buying an oil rig for the company at a suspiciously low price. So there was no way we could have been able to convince the government that everything was above board with a direct sale. And yeah guys, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss any of my daily uploads, and also check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on Spotify, Amazon, Audible, and other podcast platforms. You will often find exclusive episodes and early access to new content. Furthermore, please check out my Patreon by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or my YouTube membership program for even more exclusive stories. Thank you so much, and I will see you again tomorrow.